Malik McQueen, known to the world as Big Shaq, wasn't always the towering figure of success people admire today. His journey began in a tiny apartment on the outskirts of Los Angeles, where he lived with his mother and two younger siblings. Life was tough, but Malik had a heart full of dreams and a work ethic that refused to quit. From a young age, he learned the value of hard work by helping his mom clean houses and babysit neighborhood kids, while she juggled multiple jobs to keep food on the table. Despite his height making him stand out everywhere he went, Malik often felt invisible in the grand scheme of things. He worked odd jobs after school, delivering newspapers, mowing lawns, and even shining shoes at a local barbershop. But what he loved most was working at a small diner near his home. It wasn't glamorous. The pay was low, and the hours were long, but it gave him a sense of purpose. The clinking of plates, the sizzle of burgers on the grill, and the hum of conversation among customers made the diner feel alive. For Malik, it was more than just a job. It was an escape from the struggles of everyday life. The diner's owner, Mrs. Thompson, an elderly woman with a warm smile and endless wisdom, took a liking to Malik. She saw potential in him when others only noticed his size or dismissed him because of his humble background. "You've got something special, Malik," she would say during slow shifts. "One day, you'll do big things." Her words stuck with him, planting a seed of ambition deep within his heart. But ambition alone couldn't pay the bills. As much as Malik loved the diner, he knew he wanted more, not just for himself, but for his family too. He started saving every penny he earned, tucking away tips and cutting corners wherever he could. He skipped meals, sometimes so he could send extra money home. His siblings teased him for being stingy, but Malik didn't mind. He had a vision. One day, he'd own a place like Mrs. Thompson's, a cozy restaurant where people could gather, share stories, and leave feeling full, not just in their stomachs, but in their hearts. Years passed, and Malik worked tirelessly, taking on double shifts and picking up side gigs whenever possible. Slowly but surely, his savings grew. Then came the opportunity of a lifetime. A struggling restaurant named Mama's Kitchen went up for sale. The building was old, the furniture worn, and the reputation shaky, but Malik saw past all that. To him, it was perfect. A blank canvas waiting for someone to breathe new life into it. With every dollar he'd saved and a small loan from Mrs. Thompson, who insisted he take it as an investment, not charity, Malik bought Mama's Kitchen. It wasn't easy. The renovations drained his finances, and there were days when he wondered if he'd made a mistake. But Malik poured his soul into the project, painting walls, fixing chairs, and designing a menu inspired by his mom's home-cooked meals. When Mama's Kitchen finally reopened, it quickly became a favorite among locals. People loved the welcoming atmosphere and delicious food, but they also appreciated the man behind it all. Malik, however, preferred to stay out of the spotlight. Instead of running the front of the house, he focused on managing operations and planning expansions. He hired friendly staff, trained them well, and let them shine while he worked quietly in the background. Little did anyone know, this decision would set the stage for an unforgettable encounter, one that would test the character of a brash young waiter and remind everyone that humility is the true mark of greatness. The holiday season was just around the corner, and Mama's Kitchen was buzzing with excitement. The restaurant had become a local favorite, known for its hearty meals, cozy ambience, and the cheerful staff who greeted customers like old friends. But as the days grew colder and busier, the team realized they were short-handed. With Christmas parties, family gatherings, and tourists flocking to the area, the workload doubled overnight. The manager, Sarah, knew they needed extra help, and fast. Enter Jake Reynolds, a 20-something waiter with a flashy smile and an attitude to match. Jake walked into Mama's Kitchen for his interview wearing a leather jacket, designer jeans, and a confidence that bordered on arrogance. He claimed he had years of experience at high-end restaurants, though his resume listed only 2 places, neither of which anyone recognized. Still, desperate times called for desperate measures, and Sarah decided to give him a chance. After all, how hard could it be to train someone new? From the moment Jake started, it was clear he wasn't exactly what he claimed to be. For one thing, he struggled to remember orders, often mixing up tables or forgetting key details like no onions. Worse still, he seemed oblivious to the chaos unfolding around him, acting as if serving food was beneath him. During busy shifts, when everyone else hustled to keep plates moving and customers happy, Jake would lean against the counter, scrolling through his phone or complaining about the messy kitchen and unreasonable customers. His coworkers tried to be patient at first, chalking up his behavior to nerves or inexperience. But Jake's attitude quickly became impossible to ignore. He rolled his eyes whenever someone asked for substitutions, muttered under his breath about picky eaters, and once even told a child ordering macaroni and cheese that this isn't a fast food joint. The other waitstaff exchanged worried glances but didn't say anything. They were too swamped to deal with drama. Jake's cockiness reached new heights when he started making snide comments about the restaurant itself. "This place is cute, I guess," he said during a slow afternoon shift, flipping through the menu with exaggerated disinterest. "But honestly, who eats here? It's so basic." His coworker, Lisa, overheard him and shot him a glare. "You might want to check yourself," she snapped. "People love this place because it feels like home. If you don't get that, maybe you're in the wrong job." But Jake brushed her off with a smirk. "Relax, Lisa. I'm just saying it could use an upgrade. Maybe some fancy plating or imported ingredients. You know, class." Lisa rolled her eyes and walked away, muttering something about karma coming back to bite him. Despite his antics, Jake managed to stick around, for now. What he didn't realize was that Mama's Kitchen wasn't just any ordinary restaurant. Behind its unassuming exterior lay a legacy built on grit, kindness, and community. And soon enough, Jake would learn that every table he served held a story, every customer deserved respect, and every person in the room had layers far deeper than he cared to notice. Unbeknownst to Jake, his next interaction would change everything. Not just for him, but for the entire staff watching silently from the sidelines. It was a quiet Tuesday afternoon, the kind of day when Mama's Kitchen felt more like a cozy retreat than a bustling restaurant. The lunch rush had ended hours ago, leaving only a handful of customers scattered across the dining room. Most of the staff used this downtime to catch their breath, refill salt shakers, or share stories in hushed tones near the counter. Jake, however, looked bored out of his mind. Leaning against the host's stand with his arms crossed, he scrolled through his phone, clearly uninterested in anything happening around him. That's when the door chimed softly, signaling a new arrival. A tall man walked in, dressed casually in a gray hoodie and jeans. His presence didn't scream important, but there was something about him. His easygoing demeanor, the way he greeted the hostess with a warm smile, that made people take notice. He chose a table by the window, away from the few remaining diners, and settled in as if he belonged there. Jake groaned inwardly. "Great," he muttered under his breath. "Another random customer who probably won't even leave a decent tip." Still, duty called, or rather, Sarah shot him a pointed look from behind the counter, and he reluctantly grabbed a menu before heading over. "Hi there," Jake said without much enthusiasm, dropping the menu onto the table with a thud. "Can I get you started with something to drink?" The man glanced up, his eyes crinkling at the corners as he smiled. "Just water for now, thanks," he replied in a deep, melodic voice that carried a hint of amusement. Jake nodded curtly and scribbled it down, barely paying attention. When he returned moments later with the glass of water, he asked, "Ready to order?" The man scanned the menu thoughtfully before pointing to one of the specials. "I'll have the chicken pot pie, please. And can you make sure there's no celery in it? I'm not a fan." Jake froze mid-note-taking, his pen hovering above the pad. No celery. Seriously, who even cared about celery? He forced a tight smile, though his tone betrayed his irritation. "Anything else?" he asked flatly, already dreading having to pass along such a complicated request to the kitchen. "No, that should be all," the man said, still smiling as if completely unaware of Jake's growing impatience. As Jake turned to walk away, he couldn't resist muttering sarcastically under his breath. "What is this, some kind of joke? You think you're too good for our menu or something?" The man chuckled softly, shaking his head as if amused by the comment. Jake didn't stick around long enough to see it. He was too busy rolling his eyes as he delivered the order to the kitchen. What he failed to notice, however, was the subtle shift in the atmosphere. A couple of nearby waitstaff exchanged knowing glances, while Lisa raised an eyebrow, silently mouthing, "Oh." Later, after placing the food order, Jake lingered near the kitchen, griping to anyone who would listen. "Can you believe that guy?" he complained loudly, gesturing toward the man at the window. "Acts like he owns the place or something. Ordering special requests like we're some five-star restaurant. Ridiculous." Unbeknownst to Jake, the man sitting by the window wasn't just another customer. Beneath the casual hoodie and laid-back attitude lay a secret identity, one that would soon turn Jake's world upside down. For now, though, Jake remained blissfully unaware, oblivious to the fact that his rude behavior might come back to haunt him in ways he could never imagine. Meanwhile, the man continued enjoying his meal, seemingly unfazed by Jake's antics. If anything, he appeared entertained, watching the drama unfold with quiet amusement. Little did Jake know, karma had a way of finding its mark. And this time, it wore a hoodie. As the afternoon wore on, whispers began to ripple through Mama's kitchen like a quiet storm. Jake was still oblivious, too caught up in his own complaints and self-importance to notice the subtle shift in the air. But everyone else, they were watching and talking. Lisa, who had been working at Mama's kitchen for years, couldn't shake the feeling that something big was about to happen. She'd seen the man by the window before, though not often, and there was something familiar about him. His easygoing charm, the way he carried himself with quiet confidence. It all clicked into place when she overheard him laugh at one of the regulars' jokes. That laugh, it was unmistakable. "Wait a second," Lisa murmured to herself, her eyes widening as realization dawned. She quickly glanced around to make sure no one was listening, then slipped away from her station and approached the man's table under the pretense of refilling his water glass. Up close, there was no doubt. It was Big Shaq, Malik McQueen himself, the owner of Mama's Kitchen. "Mr. McQueen," Lisa whispered cautiously, leaning in slightly so only he could hear, "is that you?" Big Shaq looked up, his lips curling into a warm, knowing smile. "Hey, Lisa," he said softly, his voice low enough to avoid drawing attention. "Good to see you." Lisa's jaw dropped, but she quickly recovered, flashing him a grin before straightening up. "I'll let you enjoy your meal," she said, keeping her tone professional for anyone who might be watching. As she walked back to the counter, her mind raced. Should she tell Sarah? What about Jake? The thought of letting Jake dig his own grave was tempting, but Lisa knew better than to meddle too much. Instead, she decided to keep an eye on things, and maybe give Jake a nudge or two if needed. Meanwhile, Jake remained clueless, continuing to grumble about the high-maintenance customer while clearing nearby tables. He didn't realize how many ears were tuned into his every word, or how quickly gossip traveled in a tight-knit team like theirs. By the time he finally brought out the chicken pot pie, the entire staff seemed to know exactly who the man by the window really was. Even Sarah, the manager, had caught wind of it and was doing her best to play it cool, though her occasional glances toward the table betrayed her curiosity. What made the situation even more entertaining, for everyone except Jake, was how unfazed Big Shaq appeared to be. He ate his meal slowly, savoring each bite, as if nothing unusual was happening. When Jake came by to check on him, Big Shaq simply nodded politely and said, "Everything's great, thanks." There was no hint of anger or irritation in his voice, just calm assurance. If anything, he seemed amused, as though he was enjoying the spectacle unfolding around him. But Jake wasn't paying attention to any of that. All he cared about was getting through the shift without having to deal with any more difficult customers. So when Big Shaq handed him a generous tip along with his empty plate, Jake barely registered it. "Thanks," he muttered distractedly, stuffing the cash into his pocket without a second thought. The irony wasn't lost on the rest of the staff. Here was Jake, mocking someone who could buy and sell the restaurant 10 times over, and yet Big Shaq treated him with nothing but kindness. It was almost surreal, and completely infuriating for those who knew the truth. By the end of the day, the tension in the room was palpable. Everyone waited anxiously to see what would happen next. Would Big Shaq confront Jake? Would he fire him on the spot? Or would he let karma take its course? For now, though, Big Shaq stayed silent, content to observe from the sidelines. And Jake, blissfully unaware of the ticking time bomb beneath his feet, kept right on walking straight into trouble. The stage was set, and the players were ready. All that was left was for the curtain to rise, and for Jake to face the music. The dinner rush hit like a tidal wave, and Mama's kitchen transformed into a whirlwind of clattering plates, hurried footsteps, and overlapping conversations. For Jake, it was chaos, and he thrived on chaos about as well as a fish out of water. Orders piled up faster than he could write them down. Tables grew impatient, and his usual cockiness started to crack under the pressure. Instead of rising to the occasion, Jake crumbled. At one table, a family of 4 waited over 20 minutes for their meals. When Jake finally arrived with their food, they were less than thrilled. "What took so long?" the father asked, his tone sharp. Jake bristled immediately. "Do you know how busy we are right now?" He shot back defensively. The father raised an eyebrow, but said nothing, choosing instead to exchange a look with his wife that spoke volumes. Things only got worse from there. At another table, a woman flagged Jake down to complain that her soup was cold. "I'm not paying for this," she declared, pushing the bowl away. Jake groaned audibly, throwing up his hands in exasperation. "Fine, I'll send it back," he muttered, though his tone made it clear he thought the issue was ridiculous. As he turned to leave, he added under his breath, "Some people just can't be happy." Unfortunately for Jake, the woman heard him. Her face flushed red with anger, and she called Sarah over to report his behavior. Sarah apologized profusely, promising to fix the situation immediately. But deep down, she knew this wasn't going to end well, not for Jake anyway. And then came the final straw. A group of 3 well-dressed individuals sat at a corner table, chatting animatedly as they perused the menu. Unbeknownst to Jake, or anyone else, they were food critics visiting town to review local restaurants for a popular magazine. They placed their orders politely, expecting nothing more than a pleasant meal. What they got, however, was Jake's attitude. When one of them requested a side salad without tomatoes, Jake sighed dramatically. "Seriously, can't you just pick them out yourself?" he asked, rolling his eyes. The critic blinked, taken aback by his rudeness, but said nothing. Moments later, when another member of the group asked for extra napkins, Jake snapped, "Why didn't you ask for that earlier? I'm not your personal waiter." By the time their food arrived, the damage was done. The critics exchanged meaningful glances, jotting notes discreetly as they ate. Their expressions remained neutral, but their pens moved furiously across their notepads. Jake, completely oblivious to their true identities, chalked their silence up to disinterest and moved on to other tables, leaving them alone for the rest of their meal. As the evening dragged on, Jake's frustration boiled over. He snapped at coworkers, blamed the kitchen staff for delays, and even argued with Sarah when she tried to intervene. "This place is impossible to work at," he exclaimed during a rare lull. "No wonder nobody stays here long." His words echoed loudly in the quiet dining room, drawing stares from both customers and employees. Lisa shook her head in disbelief, while Sarah pinched the bridge of her nose, clearly debating whether to address the situation immediately or wait until after the shift ended. Big Shaq, still seated at his table near the window, watched silently, his expression unreadable. Every rude comment, every eye roll, every dismissive gesture seemed to confirm what he already suspected. Jake had no idea how much trouble he was in. Finally, as the last customer left and the staff began cleaning up, Sarah approached Jake. "We need to talk," she said firmly, gesturing toward the back office. Jake frowned, confused but defiant. "About what?" he asked, shrugging. "I've been doing my job." Sarah didn't respond. She simply opened the door and motioned for him to step inside. Reluctantly, Jake followed, unaware that Big Shaq was already waiting there, seated calmly at the desk. The look on Jake's face when he realized who was sitting in front of him was priceless, but it was nothing compared to the lesson he was about to learn. Jake stepped into the back office, his confidence wavering for the first time all day. The room was small but tidy, with posters of motivational quotes lining the walls, a stark contrast to the storm brewing inside Jake's head. Sarah stood by the door, arms crossed, her expression unreadable. But it was the man seated at the desk that made Jake freeze mid-step. Big Shaq, Malik McQueen himself, was there, dressed in a crisp suit that screamed authority. His calm demeanor and piercing gaze sent a shiver down Jake's spine. For a moment, Jake thought he'd walked into some kind of prank. What's going on?" he asked, forcing a laugh that sounded more nervous than amused. Big Shaq leaned forward slightly, resting his elbows on the desk. "Do you recognize me?" he asked, his voice steady and calm. Jake squinted, his mind racing as pieces began to fall into place. The hoodie earlier, the way everyone had been acting weird around him all night. A knot formed in his stomach as realization dawned. "You're the guy from before," Jake stammered, pointing awkwardly toward the dining area. Then it hit him like a freight train. This wasn't just a customer. This was the customer, the one he'd insulted and mocked without a second thought. Worse yet, this wasn't just any random diner. This was Malik McQueen, the owner of Mama's Kitchen. Big Shaq nodded slowly, his lips curling into a faint smile. "That's right. I'm Malik McQueen. And yes, I own this restaurant." Jake's face turned pale. He opened his mouth to say something, anything, but no words came out. Instead, he shifted uncomfortably, his earlier bravado crumbling under the weight of the situation. For the first time in his life, Jake felt truly small. Sarah stepped forward, breaking the silence. "Jake, we need to talk about your behavior tonight. And honestly, over the past few weeks, you've been rude to customers, dismissive to your coworkers, and frankly, unprofessional. Tonight proved that you don't understand how important respect is in this business." Big Shaq raised a hand, signaling for Sarah to pause. "Let me handle this," he said gently. Turning back to Jake, he continued, "I could fire you right now, and no one would blame me. But I don't think that's the best solution, for you or for us." Jake blinked, caught off guard. Firing him made sense. It was what he deserved after everything he'd done. Why would Big Shaq even consider giving him another chance? "Here's the deal," Big Shaq said, leaning back in his chair. "Starting tomorrow, you're going to work every position in this restaurant. Dishwasher, prep cook, host, cashier, you name it, you'll do it. For the next month, you'll learn exactly what goes into running a place like Mama's Kitchen. If at the end of that time, you still want to be here, and if you can show me you've changed, I'll let you stay. But if not..." He let the sentence hang in the air, unfinished but clear enough. Jake swallowed hard, his mind spinning. This wasn't what he'd expected. Part of him wanted to argue, to insist he didn't need this kind of punishment. But deep down, he knew they were right. He'd messed up, not just tonight, but repeatedly, and now he had to face the consequences. Okay, Jake managed to choke out, his voice barely above a whisper. I'll do it. Big Shaq nodded approvingly. Good. Now, go home and get some rest. Tomorrow's going to be a long day. As Jake left the office, shoulders slumped and head down, the rest of the staff watched silently. Some looked sympathetic, others smug, but all of them understood the gravity of the moment. Karma had finally caught up with Jake, and it wore a perfectly tailored suit. The lesson ahead wouldn't be easy, but sometimes the hardest lessons are the ones that stick. As Jake stepped out into the cool night air, he realized this was more than just a wake-up call. It was an opportunity to grow, or fail trying. The next morning, Jake arrived at Mama's kitchen with a mix of dread and determination. He had barely slept the night before, his mind replaying every rude comment he'd ever made, every eye roll, every dismissive gesture. For the first time in his life, he felt genuinely ashamed of himself. But as much as he wanted to turn around and walk away, something stopped him. Maybe it was pride, maybe it was curiosity, or maybe, just maybe, it was the faint hope that he could prove Big Shaq wrong. Sarah greeted him with a clipboard in hand, her expression stern but not unkind. "All right, Jake," she said, handing him an apron. "Today, you start in the dish pit. Follow me." Jake followed her to the back of the kitchen, where mountains of dirty plates, utensils, and pans awaited him. The industrial dishwasher roared like a beast, steam rising from its vents. A wiry man named Carlos stood nearby, scrubbing pots by hand with practiced ease. "This is Carlos," Sarah introduced. "He'll show you the ropes." Carlos gave Jake a quick nod, sizing him up with a skeptical glance. "You break anything, you clean it up yourself," he warned, tossing Jake a pair of yellow rubber gloves. Without another word, he handed Jake a sponge and pointed to a sink overflowing with greasy pans. For the next several hours, Jake worked tirelessly, his hands submerged in soapy water while the heat from the dishwasher pressed against his skin. His arms ached, his shirt clung to him with sweat, and the smell of burnt food lingered no matter how hard he scrubbed. Every time he thought he was catching up, another wave of dishes appeared, as if mocking him. By lunchtime, his confidence had been replaced with a newfound respect for the people who kept this place running behind the scenes. Over the following days, Jake rotated through different roles. He spent a shift hosting, learning how to greet customers warmly and manage wait times without losing his cool. He worked alongside Lisa bussing tables, discovering just how exhausting it was to carry heavy trays of dishes while dodging other staff members in the cramped space. And then came prep work, chopping vegetables, marinating meats, and assembling ingredients for the cooks. It was tedious, repetitive, and far harder than he'd imagined. But the hardest part wasn't the physical labor, it was the humility. Everywhere he went, Jake faced subtle reminders of his past behavior. Coworkers exchanged knowing glances when he struggled, and customers occasionally gave him wary looks, unsure what to make of the once arrogant waiter now hustling to refill water glasses or sweep floors. At first, Jake bristled under their judgment, but slowly something shifted inside him. He began to see the value in teamwork, the importance of treating others with kindness, and the satisfaction of a job well done, even if it wasn't glamorous. One evening, after a particularly grueling shift prepping salads, Big Shaq stopped by the kitchen to check on things. Seeing Jake elbow-deep in lettuce, he smiled faintly. "How's it going?" he asked casually. Jake hesitated, wiping his hands on his apron. "Honestly, it's humbling," he admitted, looking down. "I didn't realize how much goes into keeping this place running. I mean, I knew it was hard work, but I never really saw it until now." Big Shaq nodded, his expression softening. "That's the point of all this, Jake. Running a restaurant isn't about being the star. It's about making sure everyone else shines. If you can learn that lesson, you'll go far." By the end of the month, Jake had changed in ways he couldn't have predicted. He apologized sincerely to his coworkers, earning tentative smiles in return. He approached customers with genuine warmth, listening to their requests instead of dismissing them. And though he still had moments of frustration, He handled them with patience rather than sarcasm. When Big Shaq called him into the office again, Jake wasn't sure what to expect. But this time, he walked in with his head held high, not out of arrogance, but out of gratitude. Whatever happened next, he knew one thing for certain. He'd grown, and that growth was worth more than any paycheck. Jake stood nervously in the doorway of Big Shaq's office, his heart pounding as he waited for what felt like a final verdict. The past month had been one of the hardest and most eye-opening experiences of his life. He'd gone from thinking he was above the job to realizing just how much effort, patience, and teamwork it took to keep Mama's kitchen running smoothly. Now, as he faced Big Shaq seated behind the desk, Jake couldn't help but feel a mix of fear and hope. Big Shaq leaned back in his chair, studying Jake carefully. "So," he began, his voice calm but firm, "what did you learn?" Jake took a deep breath, collecting his thoughts before speaking. "I learned that I didn't know anything about this place, or the people who work here, before now. I thought being a waiter meant showing up, taking orders, and getting tips. But it's so much more than that. It's about respect, for the customers, for my coworkers, and for myself. And honestly, I wasn't giving any of that." Big Shaq nodded slowly, a small smile tugging at the corners of his mouth. "Good answer. But actions speak louder than words, Jake. Are you willing to prove that you've changed?" "Yes," Jake replied without hesitation. "I want to stay, if you'll let me. I don't expect to go back to waiting tables right away, though. If you need me to keep working in prep or cleanup, I'll do it, whatever it takes." For a moment, there was silence in the room. Then Big Shaq stood up, extending his hand. "You're not perfect yet, Jake, and neither am I. But everyone deserves a second chance. You've earned yours. Welcome back." Relief washed over Jake's face as he shook Big Shaq's hand. For the first time in weeks, he felt like he could breathe again. As he stepped out of the office, the staff greeted him with cautious smiles. Lisa gave him a playful nudge. "Don't screw it up this time," she teased, her tone light but sincere. Jake grinned sheepishly, nodding. "I won't. Promise." Over the following months, Jake threw himself into his work with a newfound passion. He started as a prep cook, gradually earning back trust by showing up early, staying late, and helping wherever he was needed. His attitude shifted completely. He laughed with coworkers, went out of his way to assist struggling new hires, and even surprised regular customers with little extras like free desserts on their birthdays. Slowly but surely, he rebuilt his reputation. One evening, during a particularly busy dinner rush, Big Shaq pulled Jake aside. "How would you feel about training someone?" he asked, gesturing toward a nervous teenager who had just started his first shift. Jake blinked in surprise. "Me? Really?" "Yeah, really," Big Shaq said with a chuckle. "You've come a long way, Jake. Maybe it's time you paid it forward." Jake agreed, determined to be the mentor he never had. Under his guidance, the young hire flourished, learning quickly and thriving under Jake's encouragement. Watching the kid succeed filled Jake with pride and reminded him of how far he'd come. As the years passed, Mama's Kitchen continued to thrive, becoming a cornerstone of the community. Big Shaq often reflected on Jake's journey, using it as an example when hiring new staff. "We all make mistakes," he'd say, "but it's how we grow from them that defines us." And Jake, he stayed loyal to the restaurant, eventually working his way up to assistant manager. Though he still joked about his rocky start, he carried those lessons with him every day: humility, hard work, and the power of redemption. In the end, Jake's story became a testament to the idea that no matter where you begin or how many wrong turns you take, it's never too late to change direction and find your true path.